Who is David Splane? How does someone go from being a red-faced, snot-nosed little kid to being a red-faced, snot-nosed grown-ass man who is trying to control the lives and actions of millions of people around the world? The question on nobody's mind, but I am here to answer it today. Well, I'm not here to answer it. David Splane's going to answer that himself, because in the latest Watchtower, we have a life story. The life story of governing body member David Splane. I'm going to use some of the audio clips of this because, I figure we should listen to it in his own words, in his own voice. So lock in. Let's do the thing. Hello and welcome back to the JW Thoughts channel. My name is Wally, and today we are looking at the life story of David Splane. Quickly before we get into it, don't forget to drop a like on the video. It literally takes a half a second, and it makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. That all mysterious thing that sooner or later we must all bow down to. So drop a like, and if you're on mobile, hype the video. Not entirely sure exactly what that is. People have said I need to enable it on my end. I can't say anything on my end. The best guess I have at the minute is like if you're on mobile you can hype things, but if you're on your computer you can't. Anyway, I don't know. If you see the little hype thing, just click it. It helps it get out to more people. Very much appreciated. So let's jump right into the David Splane story. 1940s, Calgary, Canada. There is a young woman who accepts a Bible study from a pioneer. They start having regular association with the congregation, eventually get baptized, but face some health complications. And sadly, she passes away. So David Splane was born into a divided household, you might say, or had a divided household at that time. So he started going to meetings on his own with the approval of his dad. But let's look at what he says in his own words about how he got himself involved in the theocratic ministry school, because I think it perfectly highlights how people get roped into this religion, not only back then, but also today.
In those days, the theocratic ministry school servant would start the meeting by reading out the names of the brothers who were enrolled, and they each answered, "Present." One night, I asked to have my name read out at the next meeting. They rather warmly commended me, but didn't ask if I understood what was involved. I had no idea I was volunteering to give talks at the school. I just wanted to have my name read out. The following week, my name was called, and I proudly answered, "Present." After the meeting, I received warm commendation. Several weeks later, I was handed the speaking assignment I referred to at the beginning of this article. I was in trouble. Back then, students were expected to prepare 6 to 8 minute talks. There was no assignment just for reading the Bible. My father helped me prepare the talk and made me practice it 20 times before I delivered it.
So there you have it. He doesn't fully understand exactly what he's getting himself involved with. He sees himself surrounded by people that are fairly pleasant. His mom really liked these people, and his mom passed away, which is a very traumatic event for a kid to deal with. And so he wants to be involved with this thing that his mom was involved with. It's a pretty linear line of why you'd want to feel that way. But again, he even says it in there. Well, the people didn't even ask me if I understood what I was getting myself involved with. But a couple of weeks later, boom, I get handed a piece of paper that says, "Proclaiming the world's doom." So now you have a little kid who is going to be standing on stage and proclaiming the world's doom. And he doesn't even understand how we got into this position. I just watched that Andrea Yates documentary. Didn't think it was actually that great, if I'm completely honest with you. So this is definitely not a recommendation. Maybe I don't really know a lot about that story, so I'm off in left field now, but maybe I'll have to watch a different one and I could recommend. But this particular one that I watched that just came out recently on HBO, it had some problems with it, but it was interesting nonetheless. But anyway, the point of mentioning that is some of the people that were involved in this religious cult talked about their experience of standing on street corners when they were little kids, telling people that they were going to go to hell and the world is ending and this, that, and the third, all of that normal language that, people here on this channel are probably familiar with. So it's interesting just to see how you can get a little kid to kind of just do anything. And one of the people that was interviewed, they said as much. I didn't understand what I was... End of the world, Bible prophecy, only a few people being saved. There's this guy named Michael. I don't know. I guess I'll go with it, though, because that's what I'm surrounded by. And that is, at the end of the day, how groups like this flourish, is if you can get someone in when they don't even really fully understand the magnitude of what they're signing up for, not exclusive to kids, because this also happens in adults where, they've gone through a tragedy in their life, and then they're surrounded by people that seem like very nice and supportive and loving individuals, and they just want to be involved with them because they make them feel better without fully understanding what they're getting themselves involved in. So let's move the story right along here. He talks a little bit about his early preaching work, blah, 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 nothing too interesting. But as a lot of people know, and if you don't, I guess you'll find out, but David Splane has been featured on many musical productions on JW Broadcasting, so he does go and talk about his love of music.
I am often asked about my interest in music. Both of my parents were interested in music. At age 7, I took piano lessons for a while, but my teacher was not very impressed with my ability. She suggested to my dad that I stop taking lessons. I can understand why. I wasn't very motivated at the time. After a few months, my dad located another teacher. This time I studied both piano and voice, and I flourished. As a boy soprano, I had a pleasant voice and won some competitions. My goal in studying music was to obtain a degree that would allow me to teach music and support myself in the full-time ministry. As I got closer to obtaining the degree, however, I realized that I would have to spend a lot of time studying for exams regarding harmony, music history, and composition. So I gave up my studies and enrolled as a regular pioneer. The year was 1963.
So I found this to be pretty interesting. He doesn't want to dedicate too much time into his music studies. Oh man, I'd have to be studying for a bunch of exams and tests. So I decided to pioneer instead. But this is back in, 1963? So this is back when they were still firm believers that this generation, the generation that witnessed the events of 1914 and could understand their meaning, would not pass away. In his mind, and what he was being told since he was a little kid, even declaring it himself, I'm going to proclaim the world's doom, he understood, because of what he was taught from Watchtower, that the world wasn't going to be around much longer. So this would have seemed very pointless. When you look at, an 80-year lifespan, and you say, well, were you so busy that you couldn't take some exams and tests and, dedicate 4 years or 8 years of that to becoming an expert in a field that you really enjoy? Or did you most people would be like, yeah, it's kind of like it's a worthy trade-off. You got to make sacrifices like to know things and learn things. But if you're living as if the end is going to be here in the next couple of years, then that mindset makes more sense. Well, I don't have time to go, spend 4 years in school. This system, this world isn't going to even be around probably in 4 to 8 years. And Watchtower continued to hammer this home. I've read the quote so many times, so I don't need to pull it up or anything, but there's an Awake article from the 1970s that specifically says there's a good chance your kids aren't even going to graduate high school. So this was the world that he grew up in. So it's interesting to see someone say those things today in 2026. So he's already experienced the failure of Watchtower prophecies and not going to college. He was the one that came on JW Broadcasting and announced the new light where there would be no action taken again. So we're not going to look down on anyone that allows their kid to go to university. So you see, like, through the space of his life, there's this massive contradiction. I didn't do that because the end was right around the corner. the end didn't come. But I still want to put it out there that you too, kids listening to this, oh, you don't got time for those exams and everything. Even though he's an example, his life is an example of why someone should take the time to go to university, because at the end of the day, you don't actually know when the end of the world is going to be. Assuming that you believe, like, we're getting into the JW mind here, like, obviously I don't think the end of the world is going to happen ever, except for AI takes over, but, that's for a different video. But essentially, you have like an example of why you shouldn't listen to Watchtower, and then this guy eventually becomes the person that you have to listen to in Watchtower. But now let's transition into something I think might be the most interesting aspect of his whole story. And not that it's interesting in and of itself, but it's one of those head-scratching moments of like, why are you talking about this? You've been a Jehovah's Witness for 80 years. Why are you talking about this particular subject? So let's hear from him.
In 1965, I was invited to attend a month-long course of the Kingdom Ministry School at Canada Bethel to receive more training. At that school, I was invited to fill out an application to attend Gilead. I had never considered missionary work. I didn't think I had what it took. But I filled out the application. I was accepted to the 42nd class. At Gilead, we regularly received progress reports from our instructors. The first report I received encouraged me to learn everything I could about the organization while I was at school. That was certainly appropriate counsel for a 21-year-old to receive. One of the courses offered at Gilead was instruction on dealing with the media, the radio stations, the television stations, and the press. I found it fascinating. Little did I realize how beneficial that course would be in the future, as I will later explain.
So he's a little bit older now, a young man, he's pioneering, and he has the opportunity to get some additional training from the organization. And as he mentions there, this has to do with dealing with the media, which would come in hand later on. So I guess we'll just let him get into that when it is, but a very interesting insertion into his life story. Yeah, I'm really happy about the training I received about how to deal with the media. I can't put my finger on exactly why he's including that as a quintessential part of his life story. Like, this is, now in canonical Watchtower history, David Splane's life story, boom, etched in forever in time. And he wants to talk about dealing with media. It's very strange, but like he said, we'll get into that more later. Now, just a quick note here, because I wonder if David Splane would say the exact same thing if he were, having to write something official to a court. For instance, about the situation with Brazil and there being this $100 million lawsuit. Would they argue this exact same point? So when he's talking about moving to Senegal and being involved in the missionary work, he has this little blurb in there.
After I had been in my assignment for several months, I was invited to work at the branch office one day a week. The branch office was just one room in a missionary home. As modest as the operation was, Emmanuel Padarakis, the branch servant, never let me forget that the branch represented Jehovah's organization in that country.
So, the branch represents Jehovah's organization in that country. Yep, no legalese, no trying to hide behind, well, that's a separate corporation. He says it flat out. The branch in that country represents Jehovah's organization. Will be interesting to see if this ever comes back to bite him. I doubt it will, but it's very interesting just to see how he talks about something, and he explains it as it should be. Yes, we know that a branch, the branch office of Brazil, represents God's organization, which is, the Watchtower Bible Tract Society of Pennsylvania, which is led by the governing body. But if they get into any legal trouble, they'll be like, what district is this in? Why are you filing this here? That seems like it happened down there in Brazil. Why don't you go and file that lawsuit over Brazil? Like, that's a separate entity, separate corporation. I don't know what you guys are even talking about. I have no involvement in this. two different ways of, seeing the exact same situation depending on the legal ramifications of said event. Now, I want to play a little bit longer of a section because he goes and talks about after he gets married and comes back to Canada, and they are working in isolated territories, a lot of dealings with the Catholic Church. None of it's super relevant, the stuff that happened previously, but I do think that this is interesting in how he's describing how hard it was for being a young married couple and trying to give all you can to Jehovah's organization, and yet Jehovah's organization never really provided any type of support for people. So this is a bit of a longer one, so hopefully you don't click off the video, and if you don't like hearing him talk, just skip to the end and I'll summarize it.
French-Canadian brothers and sisters are easy to love. They are straightforward, joyful, and enthusiastic. However, it was not always easy for them to accept the truth, and family opposition can be intense. Some very young people have been given an ultimatum by their unbelieving parents. Stop studying with Jehovah's Witnesses or leave home. Few, if any, have given in to that pressure. Jehovah must be very proud of them. Special pioneers were often assigned to serve in isolated territories where there were no publishers. Because of local prejudice, it was hard to find accommodations, and even harder to find a bit of part-time work. Even newly married couples lived in groups of 4, 6, or 8 in order to share expenses. They just couldn't afford to live on their own. These devoted pioneers were hard workers. When they started a study, they gave it their full attention. Now that Quebec is no longer in need of outside help, many of those pioneers have gone on to areas where there is a greater need. When we served congregations in the circuit work, we usually tried to work with teenagers on Saturday mornings. This allowed us to learn firsthand what challenges they were facing. Some of the teenagers we worked with are now serving abroad as missionaries or in other responsible roles. In those days, some congregations could not reimburse us for our travel expenses, so we sometimes ran out of money by the end of the month. On those occasions, we had to rely entirely on Jehovah, since he was the only one who knew our circumstances. He never let us down. Somehow, we could always travel from one congregation to the next.
I think it's kind of interesting to play a little thought experiment here with how he was saying some people reacted to Jehovah's Witnesses back then because their parents, if they were unbelieving, would say, stop studying with Jehovah's Witnesses or you'll have to leave the house. And then that person says, you know what, I'm going to keep studying. I'm going to do that because I love Jehovah. So then they get baptized, they're estranged from their family, never talk to them ever again. They grow up, have kids of their own, and their kids decide that, hey, living the Jehovah's Witness life isn't for me. And the person who had the same experience with their parents telling them, hey, stop studying with Jehovah's Witnesses or leave the house, now is going to be forced to say, you have to be a Jehovah's Witness or I'm kicking you out of the house. Isn't that fascinating to think about? That someone could go through that cycle, and David Splane uses that as can you believe those other people? They would be like, oh, stop serving Jehovah. Oh, the persecution. But then when you just flip it around and that person has to do the same thing to their child, guess who they talk about being persecuted? It's the parents. Oh man, this is a test. Oh, the persecution we face from Satan's system, and my kid's no longer in the truth. Oh, golly gee willikers, what am I going to do? They will do the exact same thing that they criticize. And this is a pattern that repeats itself over and over again for Watchtower. Now, the other point that I just want to highlight from that last section that we listened to was the lack of support that they had. It's very difficult for someone to just be married and then to be dedicating all of this time to preaching and trying to find part-time work. So much so that young couples who had just gotten married were having to live 6 people all in a home. And my question to that always is, if someone is going to be a special pioneer, if someone's going to work for the Watchtower organization, shouldn't at the bare minimum, the Watchtower organization at least take care of their housing and food and a little bit extra? Like if they just did like their housing and their food and maybe their travel expenses and a little bit extra, it wouldn't be such a massive burden on people. But Watchtower doesn't do that. They say, maybe you guys can all 6 get together and all stay in like 5 or 6 couples can all stay in one house. We don't know how big the houses were. So, I mean, I suppose it could be a mansion, but I highly doubt it was a mansion. So yeah, it's just always amazing to see, like, he grew up with the experience of the lack of support from God's organization and a reliance on individuals. So then when he goes into a power position, having experienced that, you would think he might have a little bit of compassion, be like, man, I remember how hard it was. We are going to make sure we take care of our people so that way they can focus on their assignment. But he didn't do that. He just leaves people out in the lurches, so much so that they come out with their governing body updates telling people that if they need food, they should plant a garden. Sage wisdom, as you'll always get from the governing body and their helpers. Now, let's pick up that thing he mentioned about dealing with the media and listen in on this section.
I mentioned earlier how much I benefited from our public relations course at Gilead. In those days in Quebec, we had many opportunities to give a positive witness on the radio, on television, and in the press. I was often assigned to work with Léonce Crépon, a fellow traveling overseer who was adept at dealing with the media. When approaching an important executive in the news industry, rather than try to come across as a professional, he would say, "Sir, my companion and I are just ministers. We know very little about publicity. But we have been assigned to let people know about a large convention that Jehovah's Witnesses will be holding. Any help you can give us would be much appreciated." That humble approach opened many doors that otherwise might have remained closed.
So their game plan that they've drawn up here after receiving training on, PR at Gilead, and when dealing with people in media, it was to take this humble approach and be like, hey, I know that we are a global religion that, literally calls ourselves publishers. I know that our entire shtick is being this publicity machine, but we don't really know about publicity, and we have this convention coming up. I don't know. I guess it's like 3 days long. So maybe if you could help us with that, that'd be great. Like, what? You represent the Watchtower and Bible Tract Society of Pennsylvania, famous for their publicity campaigns on a global scale. And yet your approach is to humbly, lower your shoulders and lower your heads. Oh, we don't know a lot about. So lying to people, like faking it, so that way they have some sympathy for you. Like, oh, I got you, pal. You old whippersnapper down there. You don't know much. Let the big dog show you what it's like. And then he's like secretly smirking to himself, like, haha, sucker. He doesn't think I know anything, but I've gotten training about it, and it's literally the thing I've dedicated my life to doing. It's very strange. It is a very weird thing to put in your life story. Why is this important to him? Maybe this is his way of saying, like, their PR disasters are all his fault. I don't really know, but it's a really interesting window into his brain, and how I'm assuming that there must be some sort of like negative feeling that he has associated with himself and how they've dealt with maybe like media things or whatever's happened like in Norway or with Toni Morris or maybe the Australian Royal Commission, anything like that. And there's some insecurity. And so this is that, I'm really putting on the old therapist hat here, but maybe this is that insecurity coming out in his life story? I really genuinely don't know. So comment down below. Let me know what you think is going on here with his like being proud of the training he received and how to deal with media, but then his idea for, dealing with media was to basically be like, oh, I'm a dummy and I don't know anything. Could you please help me, sir? I don't know. Very strange. I don't think that there's a whole lot left here except for some of Wally's classic speculation. So let's do that here at the end.
When I look back on the last 8 decades, I am thankful. I agree with the psalmist who wrote, O God, you have taught me from my youth, and until now I keep declaring your wonderful works. Psalm 71:17. I intend to keep on doing that for as long as I live.
All right, I'm protected from the 5G. The aliens aren't going to get my brain, baby. I don't know why I had this reaction. I was listening to this while I was taking my Christmas lights down. Hey, shout outs to me. I got my Christmas lights down in the month of January. I know I try and be a humble person myself. I'm not trying to brag, but I'm just saying, that's a new record, so I'm proud of it. Anyway, when he says that, I was up there, listening to this, and the first thing I thought of when he specifically said, oh yeah, for the last 8 decades. Well, Watchtower has made it very clear over the last few months that once you hit 80 years old, you can be a consultant, but you're not going to have a primary position on branch committees anymore. So is this his way of bowing out? Is this his, goodbye, it was great working with all of you, I'm taking my consulting role now? Is this the reason we get a David Splane life story? Because this is him kind of unofficially saying, I'm taking a backseat to the decision making that's going on inside of the organization now. I don't really know. They didn't say the specific year he was born. He didn't say the specific year he was baptized or how old he was when he got baptized as well. And he doesn't give his, what his actual age is. My little tinfoil hat conspiracy is that he is officially aging out and taking a back seat, and that David Splane isn't going to be as prominent of a member. I'm sure we'll still see him on JW broadcasting and giving talks here and there, but I can see a very much reduced role coming from him. Just my wild speculation. We will see how everything plays out. But that is all I got for you guys this time around. That is the story of David Splane in his own words. If you're still around, take this thing off. Don't forget to drop that like on the video. Very much appreciated. And with all of that being said, stay safe. Be kind, and don't forget, please, spend more time loving the things you love than hating the things you hate. And if you do that, you're going to have a good-ass day. Hello, Editing Wally here, and I just wanted to add something to this, because after I recorded this, I was going to release it yesterday, but it just felt like something was missing from it, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. So I just was like, oh, maybe I'll sleep on it. But even last night, as I was sitting there trying to 100% Tears of the Kingdom. I don't know why. So I'm wandering around the depths looking for these dang foxes. I think I only need 3 of them to get some badge or something. Anyway, immaterial, doesn't matter. But it struck me last night while I was wandering around the depths of Hyrule about how unbelievably sad his life story is. And maybe when I first recorded it, it just didn't stick out that much. But when you put a lifetime of sacrifice, and then he's writing his, 7-page life story, and it amounts to, I dealt with the media at Gilead. We had some people that really like Catholics, and some of them were kind of nice to us. It's just, there's nothing about the story that is why are you proud of this? It's like reading someone who decided to waste every precious moment that they have on this planet. Other than him, finding his wife and them being married for a long time. Like, that's obviously good for him and an important part in people's lives, and this, that, and the third. And, no doubt he's found some sort of, I guess, satisfaction with his spiritual brain, whatever that means. But other than that, it just seems like, wow, that guy really wasted his whole life. Like, it starts with him not really knowing or understanding why he's getting involved in the theocratic ministry school. And then it ends with, I've been doing this thing for 80 years and I intend to keep on doing it. And you just think, like, so that nothing changed from when you were a child and you were getting on stage and telling people that the world was about to end. 80 years later, you're getting on stage and telling people that the world is about to end. Where's the progress, the growth? It's just a very sad thing to see, because it's very relatable when I was first waking up. You're just flooded with all of this, like, emotion and fear. And the biggest, not the biggest, but one of the things that just really stands out about that moment for me is just how I didn't want to be like my parents and grandparents who spent their whole life doing this thing, and then they're getting old and they're still doing it. It just seems so sad and pathetic and a genuine waste of life and opportunity. Like, it hit me like a wave. When that first crack happens, and then that crack, just the floodgates open, you're just like, oh my goodness, if this crack never formed, how many years would have been wasted? How long would I have just kept doing the exact same thing without my life ever progressing and moving forward on my terms? What if the only time that I could make progression in my life was if someone told me I was allowed to? What would my life look like if I had to wait to grow facial hair till some guys in New York told me you're allowed to? What if I had to wait before going to university until some people allowed me to? It's just pathetic. I don't want to live that life. It sounds miserable. And here you have someone who reaches the top. He is someone who is holding Jesus's hand. Jesus is talking directly to him. And I read his life story, and it's the same thing. Despite him doing as much, he 100%, we'll go back to the Tears of the Kingdom, he 100%ed the Jehovah's Witness life. He grinded. He got in there. He didn't use any guides. He didn't use any cheat codes. He did the thing. He 100%ed the Jehovah's Witness life. Anything that you want to get out of it, missionary homes, Gilead, Bethel, governing body, finding a mate that you're with forever, the whole kit and caboodle. He was there when they made a new version of the Bible, for God's sake. When they launched JW Broadcasting, he was there. And even with his 100%ing of the Jehovah's Witness life, it still reads incredibly boring and sad. Because even if you accomplish everything that you possibly can living that way, you start by not knowing what you're getting into and telling people that the world is going to end. And you end with not fully understanding why you've continued to do this thing. And you're telling people that the world is going to end. And now you're just wrinkly and your bones creak and ache now. I don't know. It really stood out to me. You know, when I just took a step back and took a breath and just kind of let it marinate in my head, how unbelievably sad it is for someone to accomplish everything they possibly can living the Jehovah's Witness life, and it still reads as very boring, sad, and pathetic. So if this is meant to inspire people, I'm curious what type of effect that will have. Like if you are a teenager and you're questioning what the direction of your life is going to be, I'm really curious how many people will be inspired by this story. And I'm curious how many people will be like taken back, like, that's it. That's the best we got. He's the best example. He's done everything, and that's the life. And they almost like wake up from that. I don't know what that would look like, but anyway, just some little random thoughts that I had coursing through my brain. That is officially it. I already did the outro, but there's a finger gun for you.